It's a pleasure to be with you all this evening. I'm sure many of you have seen the cover of Moya's marvelous new collection, Bunting's Honey. And that cover is a reproduction of a painting, The Pink Bush by Joseph Quilty, the Limerick painter famous for his landscapes of the Byrne in County Clare. It's a landscape painting of what appears to be a white rock with a high hill or mountain, a furrow of what might be river scoring a valley, smudges of yellow, browns, blue of sky and land, and nestled off center, a pink bush catches the eye, illuminating the whole picture. Moya's superb poems in this collection take us to the heart of many landscapes. The Burren in Clare, so beloved to her and her husband John, the Donegal of her childhood and youth, Tyrone and China, Gaza and war lands, the landscapes of music and loss, of visual art and endangered environment, and throughout the collection, there's a sustained note of elegy and a kind of quiet prayer for this planet and ourselves. Moya is one of Ireland's finest poets. I've watched her work grow from her first fine collection, Or, back in 1990, to the power of her collected poems with Carcanet and the marvellous Donegal Tarantella. As Eva Burke has said, the marvel in many of Moya's poems is how they move from the universal to the particular, and the particular to the cosmic. Moya is remarkable, and she's going to read now from this, her seventh collection, Bunting's Honey. And as Jasmine said, after that, she and I will have a chat about the book, and we'll finish off with questions or contributions from some of you who are linking in with us this evening. So, on behalf of all of you and myself, Moya Cannon, Fáilte Ceali Roth, welcome and thank you for these poems.
Thank you very much, Vincent. It's an absolute pleasure to be here this evening. And I just want to thank so many people before I start. I'd like to thank Michael Smith and John McAuliffe at Carcanet, and also Jasmine, who looks after us all so well, and Andrew Latimer for doing the design, and Alan Brennick as well. And I'd also like to thank the Arts Council of Ireland and Eastana for, as I say, keeping the wolf from the door over the years. And also the Arts Council of England, who have also supported the publication of this book. I'm going to start with the title poem. It's called Bunting's Honey. Edward Bunting is a little, is quite a well-known figure in Irish traditional music. He was a young man who, at the age of 19, was commissioned to record the music of the last Irish harpers. There was a wonderful young doctor called James MacDonald in Belfast, wonderful citizen of that city, who felt that the harping tradition was dying out and wanted somebody to note down the last tunes. And over the next 48 years, 47 years, Edward Bunting published 3 volumes of music and preserved the music for posterity. And there's been an extraordinary renaissance in that music. And this is sort of a tribute to him. And just to the wealth which he garnered at that time and which he left to us, really. Young musicians go back now to his collections as to a well. So this is Bunting's Honey. As I say, in 1792, there was this James MacDonald commissioned him to collect it in this assembly of harpers. And 48 years later, James MacDonald was writing to Edward Bunting, and he said, "I have a great desire that you should endeavour to keep the instrument as well as the music alive, and you're perhaps the only person who can now do it." So this is for all musicians. Bunting's Honey. 3 years ago, the walls of the Bastille were breached, and today the Irish volunteers, Protestant and Papist, march down a Belfast street, fire 3 feux de joie, then enter the linen hall to forge a new state through keen debate. Nearby, in the exchange rooms, An old order seems to breathe its last. 11 harpers, 6 blind, have taken their several paths to Dr. MacDonald's Festival of Harps. The eldest is blind Dennis Hempson, last player in the old style, who plucks brass strings with crooked nails. Then blind, dapper Arthur O'Neill, who has given away his spare good suit to harper Pat McAlinden of Oriel, who went rambling and won't arrive. Here is blind Rose Mooney, whose feckless maid once pawned her mistress's harp and best petticoat for drink. And there is Harper Williams from Wales, fated to die too soon on the grey-green waves. And listen, here is young William Carr, who plays the dawn of day. The other 6, come-down gentlemen some, are dressed in grey or drab-coloured cloth. Their old patrons are generations gone, to France, to Spain, to the tuneless grave. But the old music still travels Ireland's metalled and unmetalled roads, played to all, regardless of creed or name, who esteem music and song, and keep a house good enough to afford bed, board, and maybe drink to a harper for a week or a month. A good hostess might, with luck, be repaid with a tune in her name, fine enough to catch the ear and be held in trust by some country piper or fiddler, or even by the very young man, a musical prodigy it is agreed, an opinionated youth a few claim, who now moves among the harpers, steady as a beekeeper, jotting down air after air, noting shakes and graces, double slurs and turns, delighting in the most ancient tunes, seeking out the nimble felicities of the harper's art. Gentry of the first fashion from Belfast and its environs pay half a guinea to listen and look on with attention. And Theobald Wolfe-Tone looks in, but his mind is on revolution. Decades before young Edward Bunting dies, a great French empire will rise and fall. Wolfe-Tone's revolution will have failed, yet Bunting's life will still be held in thrall by this treasure he garners in the exchange hall. But now the harpers, mostly old, display to each other and salvage airs which remember and relay griefs, gaieties, and passions of spirits long parted from their clay. For what do a musician's hands ever hold but the hammered treasure of the human soul? And something a little different. I visited Venice 2 summers ago for the first time in 45 years. And we visited the island of Torcello. And in the Basilica de Santa Maria Assunta, this wonderful semi-Byzantine church, there was a magnificent, an absolutely magnificent mosaic. And I was fascinated in particular with one image in it. It was a young angel, and he was wrapping up the starry firmament, because it was sort of done at the mosaic was commissioned at the end of the first millennium, and people thought that the end of days was coming. So he was wrapping up the starry firmament because there was going to be no more need of it. Heaven and earth were going to be one. So this is the sky wrapper of Torcello for Eleni Pilinon. What a job for a young man to land. A young angel, I mean, no cherub, but a young fellow who might be about 17 if angels lived in time, which they didn't, not even then at the turn of the first millennium, when a vast and dazzling mosaic of the end of days was commissioned for the exit wall of the Basilica di Santa Maria Assunta, to remind the home-going devout and not so devout of Torcello, mother island of Venice, of death, resurrection, and mercy, of the tailored torments of hell, a customized pit for each of the 7 deadly sins, but also of the rewards of the blessed on the day of the last judgment, believed then to be very near. And what a handsome young angel, athletic, nonchalant, one of his blue-tipped wings askew with the effort of his huge task. His heavy golden hair matching his halo, his tunic of gold, his white mantle, feather-light sandals. His beautiful Byzantine eyes are focused on his work. He is rolling up the starry firmament with all its fixed stars and wandering stars, its hero stars and storied constellations. Now that heaven and earth are no more, there can be no further need of it. And another poem from Venice. This was, we went to the Frari in Venice to see Titian's The Assumption, and I wandered into the side chapel, and I wasn't familiar at all. I should have been, of course, with Bellini's wonderful Madonna and Child in the Frari. And it is a very, very long time since a work of art had such an impact on me. I kept going back again and again to see it. It was so very, very beautiful. There's an epigraph here from John Ruskin. He said, "The heart of Venice was war, not worship." It's a city of many churches, but it was actually a very warlike city, a city which much of its wealth, a considerable part of its wealth came from slaving, actually. And it's a city of contradictions, total contradictions, so that comes into the poem. A glance. In the side chapel of the Frari, a teenage girl glances just slightly sideways from her gold-roofed alcove, balancing a little child just old enough to stand on her blue-draped thigh. Miraculous how Bellini, with his new-fangled oil paints and the finest of miniver brushes, has translated this glance with its hint of trepidation across half a millennium. How can the truth and tenderness, the absolute ringing beauty of this painting almost transcend the contradictions of this loveliest of cities, built on water and silt, built on 100 oak forests, built on 10,000 galleys, built on prayers and plunder, built on trade, knowledge and art, built on silk and gold, built on the shoulders of slaves? Could it be because, with her grave girlish face, she might be any teenage mother, black, brown, yellow or white, today or in 5 more centuries, who supports a little child just old enough to stand, turning him out to a future world far beyond the reach of her knowing, far beyond the reach even of her love? A number of years ago, we were aware of our loss of our wonderful elm trees, and then this past, I suppose, 5 to 10 years, we've become more and more aware of ash dieback. Ash is a very common tree in the west of Ireland, and anyway, this is an elegy for the ashes and what we've done to them. Dieback for Sabina Springer. Young spear-leaved birches have magicked the motorway into a shimmering green corridor, and everything is light, drunk May. Along the narrower roads, regal beech condescend to sycamore between forsaken farmhouses and fleeing bungalows, as hawthorn shakes out its white blossom to frill the small fields. Some plants, some creatures, die quietly in corners, are gone before they're noticed. A species even can disappear discreetly, with no official countdown, without the drama of an asteroid or an ice age. It's hard, though, for an ash tree to hide. Like sycamores, ashes are sociable and flighty. Yet, as we drive west, all across this greening country, they are surrendering. They are coming out of the hedgerows with their thin hands up. We're so conscious of technologies, all the technologies on which we depend, our external brains, as a friend of mine calls our telephones. But I'm just intrigued about the leap towards the leap into literacy, which our ancestors took, well, was beginning about 5 millennia ago. Because before that, even though we'd had visual art for, 45,000 years perhaps, we knew a certain amount of people's inner lives from visual art. But really, it was writing which allowed us access to the inner lives of other people of our own time and of other times. There is there's a quotation from James Harper, poet James Harper, and he in turn is quoting a monk called John Klein, Brother John Klein, who was writing in the Annals of Kilkenny in 1349. He didn't know whether he would survive or whether anybody was going to survive. So, anyway, this was written actually during COVID, our own relatively minor, I suppose, plague. Okay, so a technology. Who will survive to shoot messages from age to age like swallows joining different countries? James Harper from Magna Caristia. The poet writes of Brother John Klein, the annalist, who in Kilkenny, one day during the Great Plague of 1349, left blank parchment to continue the work, if perchance any man survive. Plague raged on, until it wore itself out, but humanity, parchment, and Brother John's annals survived. How late in our human story we learned the skill. So very long after we'd learnt to halt fleet herds of horses in pigment on a cave wall, to breathe human spirit through the hollow in a swan's wing bone, to release a mammoth from seeping stone. So many more millennia before we learnt to interpret symbols traced by a finger in dust, scratches on ox shoulder blades, ordered triangles pressed into clay, inked hieroglyphs on dried papyrus, runes carved into weather-polished rock, letters scraped with pared goose feathers on cured calfskin. Hand muscles were hard-schooled to form a perfect majuscule. Before the leap, from the furled scrolls of Alexandria to the monk's many-leafed book, from Gutenberg's great press to the compositor's hot lead, to the clacking typing pool, and from there to microchip, laptop, tablet, glimmering smartphone screen, until our globe is swathed in a tissue of whirring symbols. But a millennium from now, will anyone perchance survive to interpret our cacophony, to continue the work? And another poem about writing, and this is just about the editing out of there was an exhibition in the Chester Beatty Library in Dublin a few years ago of some of their wonderful manuscripts, Egyptian manuscripts, and I was asking who actually did the writing, and somebody mentioned, well, actually girls did some of them, and there was mention of them, but they were edited out. There was mention of them in the third. St. Jerome was commissioned to copy out the versions of in six different versions of the Hexapla, the Old Testament. But he had shorthand writers, and he also had girls who did the final calligraphy. So this was for these girls, and this is for Christopher Kelly. Girls trained in beautiful writing. Like a 5th century Maria Montessori, St. Jerome sent sage counsel to Laeta in Rome to give her infant daughter Paula letters of boxwood or ivory to play with. Let her play with them, making a road to learning. He urged Laeta to guide her hand on a wax tablet, offer her prizes for spelling. So it is surprising that it was Jerome, himself scathing of scribes who, through ignorance or arrogance, amended sacred texts. Odd that it should have been Jerome, who almost expunged from history the skilled girl calligraphers of 3rd century Caesarea, neglecting to mention them, while he credited the rest of the crack team of the great scholar Origen of Alexandria, the 7 or more shorthand writers who took dictation and relays, then passed it on to the same number of copyists to decipher it, before the girl scribes got to work on the famed Hexapla, the 6-columned Old Testament, 2 versions in Hebrew and 4 in Greek. Oh, who were those shining girls, those young slaves or free women who bent to the Hexapla, those 3rd century scribes of whom we know barely a jot? And this is for other women. It's called needlework. In 2001, I attended a lecture by a lady called Alwyn Houghton, who, we attend many lectures in our lives, and perhaps half a dozen of them stand out and stay with it. This one really stayed with me. It was about the economic strategies of women in Atlantic Europe. And she spoke of about a sort of a secret economy, a white economy, a pink economy, I don't know, blue economy, of the women who supported their families with say, the egg money, the pig money, money made, the lace making money, etc., and who saved it up very carefully. She also spoke very memorably of a young woman who walked, or women who worked as wet nurses, and of one woman in particular who walked from Galicia to Madrid with a puppy at the breast. She'd weaned her child to hire herself out as a wet nurse and worked for 2 years in Madrid, stayed boarded in, and then walked home. And she bought a cow actually, while her husband had been working in Bilbao, and how she and her husband built up the core of a dairy herd this way, and she did this trip several times. So I thought of this talk reminded me so much of women I knew of in the west of Ireland who had done something similar. They'd done Aran knitting, and they had also done kept bed and breakfast, kept students in Irish colleges, etc., in the summer, Irish language colleges. And similarly, all this money was saved up very carefully to give their children an education or to do something terribly important. And then I heard this and we'll talk about it later, actually. Perhaps I'll tell you a little more about a project in Ranafast in Donegal called She Knit the Roof. Needlework for Roisha Gowan. Needlework, the festival of broken needles at the start of Japan's New Year, when kimono makers gathered to pray for improved skills, to give thanks to their diminutive broken tools, to tenderly deposit old needles broken in silk. Needlework. How long, how far back do the tough threads run? Bone, horn, mammoth ivory needles, or awls that pierced and laced with sinew, furs and hides that allowed our foremothers, forefathers, to walk northwards, to stitch tents in snowy edgelands. Wooden, iron needles that wrought nets to trap lusting, homing salmon. Needlework, which granted poor women a small sway over destiny. The knitter, lace maker, embroiderer, or seamstress, who, under a candle or an oil lamp, over an open fire, clothed children dreaming in the next room, stitched them an apprenticeship, a dowry, an education, a sea passage to a new land. The 2 proud old sisters in East Tyrone, half blind from the white linen embroidery that had made their brother a priest. The woman from Ranafast, who rested 2 needles and the in-curled sleeve of an Aran cardigan on the table, pointed to the ceiling and said, "I knit the roof." A number of these poems in this book relate to the Byrne in County Clare, and a number of the poems in my very first book relate to the Byrne in County Clare. And I was introduced rather to the secret places and the secret histories of the Byrne, very largely by the beautiful, beautiful map of Tim Robinson, the writer and cartographer Tim Robinson, who made, I said, the most sensitive and delicate maps I have ever seen. They're pure poetry. So Tim died. Tim and his wife Marie died during COVID, in the very early months of COVID. So this poem is in memory of them. And one of the places he brought me to was Ochtmama, beautiful, beautiful valley in County Clare. And there's a holy well there. There are little churches, little medieval churches, and there is also nearby Cistercian Abbey. And up on the hill above it, there's a Bronze Age site and Neolithic site. So this is in memory of Tim and Mairead Robinson. The bosom of the gap. Who so aptly named this valley? Something about it sings, be at ease and rejoice. Scabious, purple knapweed and yarrow sway high above August grass, while eyebright, self-heal and black medic assure us that illness may pass. The holy well's dry stone enclosure shelters fuchsia, wild strawberries and ferns. A source welcomes the hopeful and heart-sore, even in our anxious times. How sheltered the dip in limestone, where 3 churches nestle in ruins. On a stone font, 2 animals tussle, necks entwined for a millennium. I have come here so often in trouble, descended the steps to the well, glimpsed the cuckoo fly down the valley, seen 3 fox cubs at play on the hill. Something about Ochtmama makes me want to lie quietly down in its tangles of flowers and grasses, forget sorrow, and then carry on. I feel very fortunate to have spent so much of my life in peace times, and we're all so conscious of the dreadful wars that are happening in so many parts of the world, particularly in the Middle East and in the Ukraine. This poem is called The Slaughter of the Innocents, and it doesn't need any explanation. We weren't shielded. So young we learned about it, about what happened in that far country, about the shepherds and angels and wise men. We rhymed it off in a classroom with an open fire and long wooden forms that rocked. Yet even at 4 or 5, it was a puzzle why God, who was good and could do anything, let the bad king kill all the little boy babies while his own baby escaped, and no one stopped the cruel soldiers. This midwinter in that far country, there are no shepherds, no angels, no wise men. The sky is bright, but not with stars. Yesterday, a friend told me of 3 young brothers, all doctors, who worked night and day for months in broken hospitals, and who last week were all killed within 2 days. One slaughter of innocents has begotten another slaughter of innocents. Babies die in smoking rubble, and neither God, nor our evolved consciousness, nor man, nor woman, stops the cruel soldiers. Thank you very much. I think we're going to go back into conversation with Vincent, but thank you all so much for listening this evening on a very sunny evening when you could be outside. Hello again, Vincent.
Moya, wonderful. That's quite a journey you've taken us on. I suppose from the sweep of history and harp music in Bunting's Honey back to 5th century Rome and 3rd century Caesarea, Venice, Japan and Ranafest, and ending in that urgent now of war and Gaza. And we'll return briefly to that final poem, The Slaughter of the Innocents, later. But I want to talk first about that title poem, Bunting's Honey. And it's such a wonderful poem. And not the first poem you have shaped out of the treasure that is Irish traditional music. And that link between music and poetry still retains a huge power in Ireland and for you.
Yes, and I neglected to say, I should have said that this was a commissioned poem. It was commissioned by Crit Éireann, Harp Ireland, which is the organisation which supports and the harp music in Ireland. And I was commissioned to write it to celebrate actually the ancient tradition of the harper and the poet in Ireland. I mean, every chieftain has a harper and his poet. It's not clear that they always got on terribly well together, but we'll have that. But it's an old collaboration, and I think, I mean, before literacy, music and poetry were they were inseparable. Really, they had to be.
You think of the poet of the Piper, Heaney and Liam O'Flynn, and
Yeah,
you've read poems and often read poems with musicians, and it seems like a very natural gathering in poetry and
yeah,
music.
yeah. I've said before, actually, I'm probably rather boring in this respect, that I think it's Pasternak said that every poet is a failed musician. I did try to play music at one stage, but in the end,
We seek to
I
make
became a good,
our own notes anyway.
I became a good listener through it. But
Exactly. It's very
yeah,
important to have good
yeah,
listeners at sessions. That famous harp festival in Belfast in 1792, I often think about that and all that has come down to us
mm,
as a result of that and as a result of Bunting's work. And it's remarkable the way you gather so much of that into the title poem of the collection. I mean, it's like to visit the exchange rooms in Belfast, I've always find it very, very moving. It's as if it retains something of all that.
yes, yes. They're under threat at the moment, but I think they will be saved. Yeah, it's yeah. Um, actually read this last week. I was very honored to read it last week in St. George's Church in Belfast,
Ah,
where Edward Bunting worked as an organist. He went to Belfast at the age of 11, as an apprentice to somebody called William Ware,
mm,
who had advertised for an apprentice, and he was already quite a good musician at that stage, and quite a difficult character it would appear. Or he he soon this he was a musical prodigy, and his friend George Petrie said that he was petted a little bit and whatever, but he gave us such a great gift. Thomas Moore heard there's an account by Thomas Moore of playing his melodies almost as soon as they came out on his piano in Ainger Street, and
mm,
he actually sort of filched actually a lot of Edward Bunting's airs
mm.
and put words to them. Wonderful, and created wonderful songs. We've been hearing a lot of them over the past few days because Joyce was rather fond of Moore's melodies.
Of
Yeah,
course, yeah. So
yeah,
Bloomsday
yeah,
brought a lot of
yeah.
them back out into the air, and
Mm, At the
actually,
very at the very end, to be fair, Thomas Moore did acknowledge his debt to Bunting at the very end.
and rightly so. Actually, there's a great music tour of Belfast if anyone wants to do it. If they're in Belfast, run by a woman called Dolores Vischer, and that takes in the exchange rooms, and it's really worth doing. It's a little
Mm,
you see Belfast in a totally different light. But it's
mm,
also astonishing to think of Wolfe Tone being there. I mean, so
yeah,
much history comes together in that poem,
yeah, yes. It
and
was
Moy,
that. Yeah, sorry.
yeah, that the title then. Bunting Sonny links to one of your epigraphs for the book, and that's Rilke's remarkable take on us humans as the bees of the invisible, and I love that. What does he say? We wildly, what is it?
Yes, we're continually overflowing towards those who preceded us, towards our origin, and towards those who seemingly come after us. It's our task to imprint this temporary, perishable earth into ourselves so deeply, so painfully and passionately that its essence can rise again invisibly inside us. We are the bees of the invisible. We wildly collect the honey of the visible to store it in the great golden hive of the invisible. Yeah.
Oh, beautiful! It's so
Yeah.
beautiful. I
Wonderful
mean,
description of art, I think, as well, actually.
it's one great that idea of us being the bees of the invisible, and I sometimes think that poets go off in search of pollen, for their poems to make yeah, something nurturing and sweet emerge at the other end, and you've certainly done that here. And that lovely last line, I mean, the wonderful last line of the poem, "the hammered treasure of the human soul." Just
Mm,
it's as if you've really nailed it. It's a
yeah.
marvelous poem. Um,
Actually, Dennis Hempson, I shouldn't be interrupting you, Vincent. Dennis Hempson, the oldest of he was allegedly 96. He couldn't have been that at the time of the festival. He said that he wouldn't play the old airs, the oldest airs, because nobody would understand them, the beautiful old music, which was sort of very poignant.
Wonderful. Moya, a number of poems in this new book explore landscape and place, as indeed many of your previous poems have done. And we've talked about the Byrne. I know you and John are great walkers, and over the years, you've loved to walk in the Byrne. You've talked about Tim Robinson there in your introduction, and Tim's remarkable insight into what he called the ABC of Earth Wonders, Arn, the Byrne, and Connemara. And but I wonder, what is it in particular about the Burren that inspires you into poetry?
Oh, where would you start? Is it? I talked to an old lady the other day who was 91. She says it was something for everybody from A to Z. She said archaeology, botany, conchology, dendrology, entomology. It's so beautiful. It's flora is is famous because you get alpine flowers or Arctic flowers side by side with Mediterranean flowers. Um, it is obviously, judging by the archaeology, its beauty has drawn people forever, really. Um, as I say, we have Neolithic sites, we have modern sites. It's so very beautiful. And Tim Robinson's maps, they give us. I mean, he'll have he'll have a Neolithic monument, and he'll have a musician's house beside it, and all so finely drawn and full of secrets. Actually, somebody showed me with a magnifying glass. He's tiny writing, and it's the most courteous, imaginative introduction. These maps to a landscape that I've ever encountered.
And you certainly honor Tim and the maps and all of it in the
Mm.
poetry. I think you went to the Burren recently, Moy, to make a radio program.
Yes,
Um,
indeed. Yes,
and
indeed.
tell me a little bit about that.
Well, with great fun, I interviewed five people, just trying to look at it from different angles. Botanist and Killian Roden, an archaeologist from Argentina called Sylvina Martin, um, a farmer, Michael John Connolly, and great guy Brendan Dunford, who has done so much to but for farmers in the Burren. He established it, we talk about rewilding now, but he discovered a few years ago, maybe 20 years ago, that in fact what preserves the wonderful flora of the Burren is actually traditional farming methods. So he sort of he has a whole farming community behind him. It's not a battle between humans and nature at all, in the way he's managed to bring the community behind him and the wider community, the farming community, and it's held in enormous affection by by the farming community, and really has introduced the wider community to the wonders of the Burren. And I also spoke to, say, this elderly lady who was 91, who was an absolute authority, Mary Loughane, on the Burren, an absolute joy. So
And I think that radio program was the idea is that a poet goes to a place that is
yeah,
of
yes,
particular
yeah,
importance to them. And
yeah.
that must have been kind of hard for you to choose, to choose that place. Could have been Donegal, I'm sure. It
Oh, yeah,
could have been around home in County Dublin, could have been
yeah,
Galway.
yeah. Very difficult, very difficult. Most of my initially, when I was asked to make this program by the producer, A Poet's Place, I said, "Well, where is my place?" I've moved around quite a bit. I was born in a stunningly beautiful place in northwest Donegal, and I lived in Galway, a wonderful city. And then I moved to Dublin a number of years ago. But during COVID, we spent a lot of time in the Burren again. And I met her, and I said, "Actually, I think I'd like to make a program about this very special place." Yeah, I should say, to return to Tim Robinson, he has written wonderful books on Arran and Connemara, And he spent his last few years in London. His health wasn't very good. He and his wonderful wife, Mairead, lived in London. And he really, really wanted to write a book about the Byrne. And he sent to Galway to his friend Nassini Cronin to send over his meticulous notes of the Byrne, but he never managed actually to write it. But it was in his heart. Yeah,
Of course it was.
yeah,
I love the poem Needlework. I mean, I should say I love the whole book. And you read that poem linking the worlds of women, sewing, knitting, working thread, stitching a future for us all, in a sense. And that great last line, which gave me such a laugh, the woman knitting an iron cardigan in Ranafest, pointing her needle up at the roof and saying, "I knit the roof." I can just see it,
yeah.
and it's so good. I reckon it has to be true.
Oh, it is true. But well, now did I take a slight liberty with it? Was it a friend? Was it her friend who said she knit the roof? No, I think she did say to her friend. She said, I knit the roof because she had with her iron knitting, the house needed a new roof, and she made enough money with her iron knitting to do it. And it just reminded me of all the other seamstresses, etc., that you know, just supported their families in so many different ways over and just the whole miracle of needlework itself. We think about weapons, etc., but it was needlework that allowed people to live in tents in colder countries. But Roisha Gowan and Katrina McLaughlin, they had a theatre piece really in during Errigal Arts Week a number of years ago called "She Knit the Roof," and they had some of the old knitters in participating in it.
Yeah, so it's lovely that the poem is dedicated to Roisha then,
Yes.
out of that and
Yes, yeah. And
out
in
of
fact,
what
it was
they
her,
did.
yeah, it was her mother, Mairead, who told me the story of She Knit the Roof, and it was that line which drew me as well. I just thought it was so wonderful. The
I think I'll
idea.
never see a thatched roof in quite the same way again. It's like the woman inside who managed to knit it. It's marvelous. Um, Another line that leaped out at me that you weave into your poem, "The Glance," and it was one I didn't know, is that powerful line by Ruskin. Uh, the heart of Venice was war, not worship. And of course, we often forget such truths as we gaze at a beautiful image like Bellini's Madonna, who lights this poem so
Yeah.
beautifully.
Mm. Yeah, we visited when we were at we visited the Arsenale while we were in Venice and spent quite a bit
Mm,
of time walking around it, and you just got a sense of the sort of enormous naval power of Venice, huge naval power, and how it created this little maritime empire in the Adriatic, as well as its huge trading empire. I mean, it's a wonderful city in so many ways and
mm,
wonderfully independent, and it also brought together the wealth of Roman and Byzantine
mm.
culture. The early churches in particular, you're sort of very aware of the Byzantine inheritance. But it's a city of wonders, but a city of contradictions. Uh, and that, as I said earlier, that particular painting, it's many years since I was so moved by a piece of art, and just had to write about it.
What I love in the book is the way the poems move through time and place. And it's as if there's no distinction. I mean, there is, of course, everywhere is distinct, but there's an absolute ease of movement across the world as you travel in it, as you inhabit it, and as you give words to what you witness and what you ask us to witness in turn through the poem. So I mean, it it's a very, in that way, to me, it's a very expansive book. I mean, and I come back to that line of Eva Burke's, that remarkable the way so many of your poems move from the universal to the particular, and the particular to the cosmic. So there's this constant sense of movement, and yet there's a deep kind of calm and quietness in there too.
Well, we do our best, Vincent, as you know.
I mean, that's me giving you a little mini lecture, boy. I don't expect
Yeah,
you to, sorry,
no,
to
no,
respond to that. I mean,
no,
you
no,
you
thank you.
do,
No,
yeah,
no. Well, every poem starts with kind of a niggle, I think
Mm.
you say, and you say, I'll come back to that, and then you do.
Yeah. I mean, were the poems written over a period of a few years in
Oh yeah,
the
over
last,
six
yeah.
years probably. Yeah, yeah. Some of these, a handful of these were in my collected poems, which came out in 21. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they're written over a period of 5 or 6 years anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think a few were commissioned as well, and so
Yes. Yes.
that's so it was good, isn't it, to get that little leg
Yeah.
up on a prompt and makes you go on
Yeah.
and search and work. Of course, war is there as background to the power and splendor of Venice, and it's in the book more directly in poems like Slaughter of the Innocents, which you read. And again, it seems to me that your poems about the human war on the environment, tally somehow with those on the barbarity of the wars around us now. And again, I'm struck by another line from Rilke, which inspired a poem in the collection For the Birds, where he says simply, "You must change your life." And um, I think about the image in Dieback, that astonishing image of the ash trees surrendering um, their thin hands up, coming out of the landscape, the thin hands up. It's a powerful image. But I suppose, I guess we can only hope that poetry can maybe change some things, change a few lives, make for a bit more civility in the world.
Yes. I like the lines of Mahmoud Darwish, where he says, "Against barbarity, poetry can resist only by confirming its attachment to human fragility, like a blade of grass growing on a wall while armies march past." I, I hope I hope he would keep up his faith today in Gaza. It's anyway. There are
Yeah,
terrible things happening.
absolutely.
Things happening. Yeah.
Uh, I think we've had a few messages in, Moya. Um, there's Joseph Hassett saying such wondrous poems, and somebody, Florencia Fragasso, says our great grandmothers and grandmothers knit our roofs in the early 1900s in South America. So,
Yeah.
you're touching
Yeah.
on the universal for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's kind of what you were saying, that what
Yeah.
you witnessed in Spain,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
led you back to Ireland.
Yeah. Yeah, just
Uh,
that quiet work of women in so many countries, sustaining their families, and the point that the lecturer Alwyn Houghton made was that these were always all this money was always saved, and it was put towards something like a son's apprenticeship, a a girl's education, perhaps a passage to America, etc., and very often something that would raise a status family, and that's why I couldn't resist putting in something about the
mm,
my uncle spoke of about two old women and a dowry really, two old women in South Tyrone, who's he said they were half blind from doing white work, which was linen embroidery, and
mm,
all of this was saved up for to educate their brother to become a priest, rather than to their
yeah,
dowry, so they're also, yeah,
astonishing.
yeah.
Yeah,
But it tended to be something that would raise the status of the family, Owen Houghton said.
of course.
Yeah.
Uh, we have guests from Cornwall, from Pennsylvania, Bonsoir de Saint-Romain, very hot in Manchester, Orkney, Buenos Aires, and it's pretty good old international audience there, Moya, and
Yeah.
uh, I think you probably have. I think Eva Burke was joining from Berlin as well.
Yeah,
So,
well, thank you all so much for coming this evening or this afternoon if it's in Buenos Aires or Insia. And Joe, say thank you so much for giving your time to listen in. It's
Moya, I
great to
just
know you're all
wondering,
out there.
yeah, how, going back to 1990 and the publication of Or, um, poetry, the world of poetry is in Ireland and publishing in Ireland and publishing in the UK has changed quite a bit since then. And
Mm.
I've just been reading Adrian Fraser's marvelous biography of John Montague. And I mean, that's again so much of a time. But
Mm.
it strikes me that, we're very fortunate in Ireland to have organizations like Poetry Ireland and the Arts Council and Aithona, and there really is a support system there for poets that doesn't exist in every country.
Yeah, I do think we're very fortunate. It's a small country, and it's I think Dennis O'Driscoll said it's probably the easiest country in the world in which to get published initially. And when I moved to Galway in 1983, and at that stage I decided that I wanted to write, and that was what I wanted to do. And almost immediately I found a workshop, and it was and then as you say, Poetry Ireland had been set up in I think 79, I think, to support
Mm,
of poets, etc., and published a review, etc. So you had outlets, you publishing outlets, magazines, very important. There was Poetry Ireland Review. There was Cipher, is a wonderful magazine, which is coming up to its 100th issue soon,
mm,
published by Elaine Quillen and Macdara Woods and Company. And
yeah.
then Jessie Lendenny and Mike Allen published, set up a little magazine called Salmon, set up Salmon Press.
Mm,
My
yes.
first book was actually published with Salmon Press in 1990. And I was very fortunate with a lovely, lovely poetry community in Galway. But then, as you said, the Arts Council does give significant grants. And then we
Yeah.
have this, we're fortunate, have this wonderful organization, Aithana, which where if you're elected to it, it's an association of state-sponsored association of creative artists, and they're 250 at the moment. And if you're
Mm,
elected to it, you can apply for a grant for 5 years, and it's repeatable
yeah.
as long as you really usually, if you devote your life to your work, and it's made it possible. It's made it possible for people
Absolutely.
to
Yeah.
make a life, and if you
Yeah.
could call it a career. I
Keep
don't
and keep going.
somehow the
Uh,
career doesn't sound like the right
yeah.
word at all in
Um,
in
Moya, we
poetry.
have a question, well, I suppose a contribution question from Victor Luftig, who says,
Oh, hello,
congratulations on
Victor.
such a wonderful collection. We were noticing how much music the assonance, internal rhyme, half rhyme, etc., brought to these poems. And he wonders, have you been seeking a particular sound here?
Oh, well, I believe in assonance. I
Yeah.
believe it's used a lot in Irish poetry, and it has an immensely powerful emotional effect. I don't use end rhymes very much, but assonance, I think, I mean, I don't know why particular vowels have particular
Mm,
emotional impact, If you can, high I, eyes, narrow vowels create tension, and lower vowels
mm.
have different emotional effects. So it's yeah, I'm very conscious of assonance and have been right from the start. There's an internal music. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, Moya, I think we'll finish shortly. I know you're going to read one last poem for us, but I wanted you to know as well that the great musician Donal Lunny is reading your book at the moment, and I
Oh,
imagine it will be both a consolation and an inspiration to him, as
that's
it
very nice.
is
No,
and will be for so many of us. Actually, there's a launch, isn't there, next week in Books Upstairs in Dublin?
there is, yes, yes. Books upstairs on the 26th, Thursday the 26th at 6 o'clock. Yeah, yeah,
Right. So again,
yeah.
anyone who's around, pop into that and say hello and
Very welcome.
get a book signed. And um, my so grateful for the poems and the gift of Bunting's honey. And going to finish with the poem. I think again it's another landscape poem. Are we back to the Byrne?
Yes, indeed. It's called Turlough Hill. And before I start, just thank you so much to all of you who have come on this evening, and thanks to you, Vincent, for being so good as to read the poems and talk about them. Turlough Hill is a hill in County Clare, just above the little valley of Mama, which I mentioned. It has, on the top of it has a very enigmatic monument. It's about a quarter of a kilometre across, and nobody's quite sure what it is. It's an enclosure, but it's not a fortress because it has several openings, so it's assumed that it was a ceremonial space. And it was excavated a few years ago. And there are little huts nearby, contemporary. They figured it was probably Bronze Age, Iron Age, but probably Bronze Age. There are little huts nearby dating to the same period. There's a much older Neolithic, huge Neolithic burial mound nearby. But they excavated and found nothing except hazelnut shells. There's water sources down in the valley, but there's nothing up on the hill. So they figure it was where people came occasionally. And when you stand there on a nice day and look out, the view is beyond all belief. And when you go to I find always when you go to these prehistoric sites, I'm convinced that people's aesthetic sense was as well developed then as ours is now. People were drawn not just to the fishing or the hunting, but also to the beauty. So I leave you with Turlough Hill, and thank you again. For Margaret Duffy and Pascal Bradley. Some places resist interrogation, but still are rich in giving. Places like this one, that draws us to leave our everydays, to trudge up a cattle-trodden, tractor-rutted lane, to climb up through blossom and sharp-edged stone as into a song. This huge, angled hilltop enclosure asks 100 questions, yields few answers. Did people sacrifice here, or bring their beloved dead for ravens to carry their earth essence into an untroubled sky? Was this a court of law, a place of congress for many tribes, a place of festival at harvest time? Because nobody wrote, nobody will ever know. Yet, with its many entrances, this was no fortress. Early peoples who came here also left a high burial mound, foundations of 100 huts, and scattered hazelnut shells. Today, exhausted at the hilltop, we are rewarded with rapture under a high sky, with a new sweep of vision out past Bell Harbour to the islands and the glittering sea, to the stepped and light-shaken, the flower-filled catacombed hills, to the valley and the far green plains. And the sharing of all of this with those we know and those we don't, with the companion beside us, with those who built this great enclosure, and those still centuries from birth, is like the sharing of a dance or a song, like the sharing of any beauty, any pain, a soul marking, an enduring bond.
Beautiful.
Reminder.